What is good, backloggers? If you grew up in the 90s, you probably associate Contra with cool dudes, crazy action, and brutal gameplay only made for the toughest of players, or those with lots of money for continues. If you're a bit younger, you probably associate Contra with poop. No, seriously, what the hell is this shit, Konami? Anyways, let's just assume these newer games don't exist and let our mental self enter a 90s arcade filled with 90s people, 90s music, and 90s arcade games, and we're there to play Contra. Welcome to the Backlog project, where we play through a gigantic backlog of games and you get to choose which one will be covered next. Just head down to the description of the video to take part in our weekly poll and pick your favorite. Reviewing the first Contra game is a bit of a weird prospect and will require me to take a different approach to how I usually structure these videos. Why, you ask? Because old games are weird and there are probably more versions of this game out there than people watching this video, so we'll have to find the most relevant ones to concentrate on. Thankfully, Konami did something right for once and released the Contra Anniversary Collection in 2019, and they even did a pretty great job at that one. Just like the Castlevania collection I reviewed in another video, this package is filled with all of the most important games in the series, easily accessible and upgraded to not only look good on modern screens, they also include handy features like save states and rewind. I didn't use them because I want an unbiased review, but I think it's very good they are available for those that want to use them. Anyways, Konami included the arcade and NES versions here, with the NES versions being playable as Japanese, US, and European versions, because they're all different games. I don't want to make a different video for each of these, so I'll just talk about each back to back and draw a quick comparison at the end. First up, the arcade version. The first Contra game to ever grace our planet, the birth of a legend. It's alright, really. Considering this game came out in 1987, which makes it 6 years older than me, it holds up really well and still looks passable. More than I can say about myself, I guess. You've got some nice animated backgrounds like a waterfall, frozen sea, and glowing mountains? Don't ask me why, these old games didn't have to be cohesive. Apart from that, character models aren't overly detailed, but they are distinct enough to tell your badass and the enemy cannon fodder apart. That's what most of the enemies in this game are, by the way. None of them, except for the bosses, pose any real challenge because they don't really have a lot of interesting attacks and almost all go down in just one shot. But more on that later. The levels themselves are graphically well designed and you always know where you are and what's going on due to the visual storytelling and unique levels. I find it hard to describe the soundtrack of Contra as anything but heavy. Like, it's not a bad OST at all. Every level has their own music and they're all great to listen to and will pump you up to face the upcoming dangers. But that's all they do. Pump. They wanted to make players feel like they were the heroes in an action film, and the music pretty much is all action. It's like you're at a metal concert and the band only plays their headbanger titles. It sounds good, but my ears would have enjoyed the odd somber sound here and there for variety. Also, this game lags. FPS drops weren't really a rare occurrence back then, but in a game that requires some pretty tight dodging, constant slowdowns can be very annoying and Contra slows down a lot. Okay, story, hear me out. There's none at all, in the game at least. The general setting is that the Red Falcon organization is evil and tries to eliminate humanity, and humanity in turn sends the Contra unit, consisting of Bill and Lance, our playable characters, to find out what's going on and eliminate the threat. On their mission, they find some aliens that seem to control the Rat Falcons, so they kill them as well just to be sure, and bada bing bada boom, world saved. As I said, none of that is readable or explained in the game, so just take this little paragraph as trivia. It doesn't really change anything whether you know about it or not. Doesn't really matter though, because you're here to shoot, and shoot you will. Contra is what you would call a run and gun game. Your goal is to make it to the goal of each level, just like in a jump and run, but you kill stuff with your guns instead of jumping on or over enemies' heads. You're badass, but still very much vulnerable. One shot will kill you, and you only get a few lives per continue, so you better make sure that you dodge all those bullets the enemies fire at you. And touch no enemy, because Bill and Lance are strong, manly soldier men, and these tend to develop hypersensitivity. You can shoot in 8 directions, run, duck, and jump, so you've got all you need to survive your mission and dish out lots of pain. As I already said, most enemies also fall to one hit, so the game compensates that by swarming you with them and making them spawn in the most unfair positions, so you get killed the moment they appear on screen. Really, most of the difficulty of this game doesn't come from it actually being challenging, but the fact that you have to remember each and every enemy spawn to have a chance of clearing the levels without being obliterated. Or you just take your time. Just like with Castlevania, another Konami classic, the game doesn't respawn any enemies. So long as you just turtle your way through the levels, you are mostly safe from any nasty surprises. Of course, that's not really a fun way to play this, and with a score-based arcade version, you would certainly not be first on that leaderboard, but at least it allows you to clear the game a lot easier than going in guns blazing. Speaking of guns, the main feature of Contra is that, similar to shoot-em-ups, you can find upgrades to your arsenal on defeated enemies and in item boxes. Let's take a quick look at all of them. Your starting weapon is a rifle that can, well, shoot. It's slow, doesn't have rapid fire, and doesn't do a lot of damage. The machine gun is basically a better version of the rifle. You can hold the button to continuously shoot, and the damage from lots of little bullets quickly adds up. Our Resident Easy mode, the spread shot, does exactly what it says. It takes the qualities of the machine gun, but fires 5 bullets at once that cover a wide arc. Given that most enemies either have next to no HP, and the ones that do are usually big enough to eat multiple of these bullets at once, this makes for a very easy to use and powerful weapon. It also retains the rapid fire button, albeit slower, so you can just hold the button and rush down every level. The laser might be the most powerful weapon in the game, but it's also hard to use. It can only shoot one beam at a time, and while the beam deals tons of damage, it's very slow and thus kind of hard to hit with. Not really my style, but certainly useful, especially against bosses. Last, and definitely least, is the flamethrower, or flame pooper. I really don't know what this is even supposed to be. It's called flamethrower, but it sure as shit doesn't act like one. You shoot these wriggly fireballs out that swirl around the place and can potentially deal a lot of damage, but they can also potentially arc just the wrong way and miss an enemy. They're also slow as hell. Crappy weapon, and the only one I actively avoided picking up after the first time. In addition to all of these, you can also find upgrades that increase your rate of fire, give you invulnerability, and even one that destroys all enemies on screen. All in all, there is a decent bit of variety here gameplay-wise, and using a different weapon definitely changes your approach on how to beat the game. Another thing Contra does to give you a bit of variety is changing your perspective. No, you're not suddenly fighting for the alien side. Of the 5 stages in the game, stages 2 and 4 differ in the sense that they are played in a semi-3D style where you shoot into the depths of the screen, a bit like a third-person shooter. Your goal here is to shoot the weak points in each wall so you can move on to the next screen and do that until you hit a boss. Since these stages don't really allow for you to aim and maneuver as much as the normal ones, they felt a lot harder to me, if only for the fact that dodging in an enclosed space isn't as easy as outside. Go figure. By the way, you can easily help me in growing the channel further by clicking, tapping, or whatevering the like button. Thanks for being awesome. Bosses in the game are alright, but kind of easy compared to the rest of your mission. Most of them have very simple attack patterns and are nothing more than glorified target dummies. The only ones posing a decent challenge are the boss of stage 4 and the fat dude mini-boss in stage 5. Alright, now that you know everything about Contra, it's time to take a little tour of the different versions of the game, since we have only talked about the original arcade version so far. Like most arcade games of this era, it got an NES port, but there's something a bit more unusual going on here. Every region the game released in, Japan, US, and Europe, are different versions. The US version is probably closest to the original arcade game. Sure, the graphics are significantly worse given the hardware it runs on, but to my surprise, this version is a lot smoother to play because it doesn't share the obnoxious slowdowns of the arcade. The soundtrack, while sharing the same compositions, is also notably different due to the weaker sound chip of the NES. Interestingly, this works in its favor because the music loses a chunk of the weight I talked about earlier, making it a lot easier on the ears. To be fair though, I think it also makes it lose a bit of what made the original soundtrack unique, so there's an argument to be made for both scores. One thing that might seem insignificant, but is very much a game changer, is the aspect ratio. Whereas the original game was very narrow due to how arcade screens are laid out, the NES version features a simple 4:3 ratio, giving you a broader view of the level, and thus enabling you to see enemies a lot earlier and significantly reducing the dangers of them spawning right in your face. The controls also feel a lot more precise, with jumps especially being a lot easier to navigate. All in all, this version is just a good deal more accessible and fair, making it more fun to play. Levels are also adjusted to reflect these changes, most of them being longer and the game having 8 levels in total compared to the 5 of the arcade version. Where stage 5 of the arcade was one very long level, they split it across 4 distinct levels in the NES version. The Japanese version of the game is distinct in one very obvious manner: cutscenes and story. Whereas the other versions rely on outside info to get a grasp of what's going on, Japanese players had the pleasure of being introduced to the game's plot by animated cutscenes and written dialogue in between missions, giving you a bit more of a drive to want to see the game through to the end. It also looks a good deal better because Konami used an exclusive chip in the Japanese cartridge to make animation of backgrounds possible and render different structures like rock formations more distinctly. Apart from a few small changes to enemy behavior, the game is also just plain harder. When you beat the US NES version, you get thrown into sort of a new game plus, where enemies are tougher to kill and move and shoot faster. The Japanese version starts at that difficulty from the get-go, so be prepared for some untimely deaths if you're already struggling with the US version. Think that's enough differences for today? Well, the European version begs to differ because that one isn't even called Contra anymore. Instead, it's called Probotector, and it makes away with all the soldiers and aliens. We've got robots now! All of the enemy and player models got replaced by robots, and the story was changed to be kind of the same, but makes even less sense. It's now just good robots versus bad robots. You might ask why they did that. Are robots just cooler than soldiers in Europe? Well, while I can't deny that the US's obsession with soldiers in war might have made the game more popular over there, the reason for this particular change can be attributed to one single country: Germany. You see, German censorship law is pretty harsh, and back when gaming was in its infancy, no one could wrap their head around why it might be fun to shoot people in a video game.
Spoiler, they still can't.
And thought violent video games will mess up kids and teenagers.
Spoiler, they still think that.
To avoid being indexed by German law and thus unable to sell the game over there, Konami decided to change the game in a massive way and circumvent this conundrum. Robots shooting other robots is a lot better in the German eye than people shooting aliens after all. Anyways, with European video game distribution usually going through Germany, it wasn't really feasible to make multiple different EU versions, so they just gave Probotector to the whole EU, making my first conversion about the Contra series with a German weirdly surreal. The game itself is basically the same as the US version, by the way. It's literally a reskin, but nothing was changed gameplay-wise. Alright people, the info dump is now officially over. Hope you're still awake because it's time to crown the best Contra. As in Contra 1, not all of them. I've only played this one yet, so that'll have to wait. I can definitely see why people remember this game so fondly. For such an old game, the action is there, and even if it's cliche, fighting aliens as the closest thing to Pixel Rambo they could pull off back then is still badass. All of the versions also have their own charm and reasons to play them. The arcade version is obviously the best looking, but the controls don't feel as tight as on the NES, and the pacing feels a little off with how short the levels are. Overall though, the NES game is the one you should play. But which version? EU and US don't really differ much, and it's probably down to your preference of style. Personally, I would recommend the Japanese version because even if you can't read the text, the cutscenes are nice. The improved animations made this a very beautiful game for NES standards, and the increased difficulty feels like exactly how the game was designed to be played, even though it gets a bit too unforgiving in subsequent runs. No matter which version you choose, this is a game that still is, and probably forever will be worth playing. Not only because it's a classic, but also because it's just a short burst of good old fun. After completing way too many versions of the original Contra, we had 2 hours and 21 minutes of total playtime. Each game completed once, the NES Japanese version twice. 372 poor enemy soldiers killed. 1,332,600 points earned in the arcade version. one immediate regret whenever I picked up a flamethrower. Hope you enjoyed the video, thank you very much for watching, and remember to always keep that backlog rolling.